The prison station called Void's Edge floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal spider. Ships came and went from its docking bays, bringing criminals and taking bounty hunters. Inside the station's cantina, aliens from dozens of worlds drank, fought, and made deals. But when Kethamor walked through the doors, everything went quiet. He stood 9 feet tall, his black scales catching the dim lights. 4 massive arms hung at his sides, each one ending in claws that could tear through steel. His yellow eyes swept across the room, and every creature there suddenly found something else to look at. Even the bartender, a tough old Corellian with scars covering half his face, stepped back when Kethamor approached. "The usual," Kethamor said, his voice like grinding stone. The bartender poured a glass of Vask blood wine without a word. His hands shook slightly as he set it down. Kethamor had that effect on people. In 20 years of bounty hunting, he had never failed to bring in a target. Dead was easier than alive, and he preferred it that way. The Vask were born hunters. Their homeworld was a place of endless war, where only the strongest survived. Kethamor had been the strongest of them all. He left his world to hunt bigger prey across the galaxy, and he had found plenty. Pirates, rebels, murderers, thieves, he had killed them all. But the humans were his favorite targets. Humans were soft. They cried when they were caught. They begged for mercy. They talked about their families and tried to make deals. Kethamor found their weakness disgusting. How such a pathetic species had spread across the galaxy was beyond his understanding. They had no claws, no natural weapons, no thick skin to protect them. They were prey animals pretending to be predators. A small alien scurried up to his table, clutching a datapad. It was a Zelanti, one of the bug-like creatures that ran most of the station's business. Its compound eyes reflected the cantina lights as it spoke in a nervous whisper. "Great Hunter Kethamor, I have a job for you. Very important. Very dangerous. Very profitable." Kethamor looked down at the creature without interest. "How profitable?" 5 million credits. Now the Vask warrior paid attention. 5 million was serious money. Enough to buy a small fleet of ships or a mansion on any civilized world. He gestured for the Zelanti to continue. "The target is human," the creature said, sliding the datapad across the table. "Name is Dong-Soo Kim. He stole classified terraforming technology from the Terran Colonial Authority. They want him brought in alive, but they will pay for dead too." Kethamor picked up the datapad with one of his lower arms. The screen showed a human male in his 30s. Average height, average build, brown hair, brown eyes. Nothing special about him at all. The file said he was a mining engineer who had worked on various colony worlds. No military training, no combat experience, no record of violence. "This is worth 5 million? Kethamor asked. "He looks like every other weak human. The technology he stole is very valuable," the Zelanti explained. "It can turn dead worlds into gardens in half the time of normal terraforming. The Authority wants it back badly." Kethamor scrolled through the file. Dong-Soo Kim had a wife named Hai-Jin and a young daughter called So-Young. Both were listed as deceased, killed in a mining accident 6 months ago. The human had disappeared shortly after their deaths. "Where is he now?" Kethamor asked. "Last seen on Kepler's Rest in the Outer Rim. It is a lawless world where criminals go to hide. Very dangerous for most hunters, but not for you, great Kethamor." The Vask warrior drained his glass and stood up. Every conversation in the cantina stopped again as his massive form cast shadows across the room. "I will take this job." The Zelanti rubbed its front legs together in satisfaction. "Excellent. The Authority wants this done quickly and quietly. No witnesses." Kethamor was already walking toward the exit. A human with no training and no weapons hiding on a backwater world? This would be the easiest 5 million credits he had ever made. He would be back in a week with proof of the kill. His ship, the Bloodfang, was docked in the station's military section. It was a Vask hunting vessel built for one purpose: tracking and killing prey. The hull was armored black metal that could survive attacks from most weapons. Inside, it had everything a hunter needed: advanced sensors, medical bay, weapons locker, and holding cells for live captures. As he prepared for departure, Kethamor thought about the human. Dong-Soo Kim had lost his family in an accident and then stolen valuable technology, probably planning to sell it to pay for revenge against whoever he blamed for their deaths. Humans were always emotional like that. They let their feelings make them stupid. The Vask warrior had seen it many times before. Humans who thought grief made them strong, who thought they had nothing to lose. They were wrong. Everyone had something to lose, even if it was just their life. And Kethamor was very good at taking that away. He set course for Kepler's Rest and activated the ship's autopilot. The journey would take 3 days, giving him time to study his target. The file was thin, but it told him what he needed to know. Dong-Soo Kim was just another soft human who had made the mistake of stealing from people more powerful than himself. As the stars streaked past his viewports, Kethmore cleaned his weapons and sharpened his claws. Soon he would add another human to his long list of kills. The prey was waiting for him on a dead world, probably crying about his lost family and wishing he had never taken the technology. But wishes would not save Dong-Soo Kim from the most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy. Nothing could save him now. Kethmore had never failed, and he was not about to start with some weak, emotional human. The hunt was about to begin. Kepler's Rest looked like a wound in space. The planet was mostly desert, with dead cities scattered across its surface like broken bones. Once it had been a thriving mining world. Now it was home to smugglers, outlaws, and anyone else who wanted to disappear from civilized space. Kethmore's ship dropped through the thin atmosphere and landed near the ruins of New Seoul, the planet's former capital. The city stretched for miles in every direction, but most of the buildings were empty shells. Sand drifted through broken windows and filled abandoned streets. The Vask warrior stepped out of his ship and breathed the dry air. His sensors picked up traces of recent human activity near the old mining complex on the city's edge. Dong-Soo Kim was here somewhere, probably hiding in the tunnels like a frightened animal. Kethmore had tracked hundreds of prey across dozens of worlds. The pattern was always the same. First they ran, then they hid. Finally they begged when he found them. Humans were the most predictable of all. They thought with their emotions instead of their minds. He moved through the ruined streets with silent steps. His forearms carried different weapons, a plasma rifle, an energy blade, a neural disruptor, and a capture net. He would not need all of them for one weak human, but Kethmore believed in being prepared. The mining complex rose out of the desert like a metal mountain. Huge machines sat rusting in the sun, their work finished long ago. Conveyor belts stretched between processing plants that had been shut down for years. It was the perfect place for prey to hide. Kethmore's sensors detected movement in the main processing building. He smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. The hunt would be over before it truly began. He activated his camouflage field and became nearly invisible as he approached the building. Inside, the machinery was covered in dust and sand. Broken equipment littered the floor, creating shadows and hiding places. Kethmore moved carefully, his enhanced hearing picking up every sound. Somewhere in this maze of metal, a human was trying to hide from death. A noise came from deeper in the building, footsteps on metal moving away from his position. Kethmore followed the sound, his excitement growing. The chase was the best part of any hunt. The moment when prey realized it was being stalked, when fear began to cloud their judgment. He rounded a corner and saw movement at the far end of a long hallway. A human figure ducked behind a large machine. Kethmore raised his plasma rifle and fired. The blast lit up the darkness and melted a hole through the machine, but there was no scream of pain. The Vask warrior moved forward to examine his shot. Behind the machine, he found nothing but empty air. His prey had already moved to a new hiding spot. Kethmore felt a moment of surprise. Most humans would have panicked after being shot at. This one seemed to be thinking clearly. A voice echoed through the building, coming from speakers mounted on the walls. It was calm and steady, speaking in basic Galactic with a human accent. "You must be the bounty hunter they sent for me. I wondered when someone would come." Kethmore looked around, trying to locate the source of the transmission. "Show yourself, human. Make this easy for both of us." "Easy?" The voice laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing about this is easy. Do you know why they want me dead?" "I do not care about your crimes," Kethmore replied. "I only care about collecting your bounty." "My crimes?" The voice was harder now. "My crime was learning the truth. My crime was trying to tell people what really happened to my wife and daughter." Kethmore had heard this kind of talk before. Humans always tried to justify their actions by claiming they were victims. It was another sign of their weakness. "Your family is dead. Stealing will not bring them back." "No," the human said. "But maybe justice will let them rest in peace." A deep rumble shook the building. Kethmore looked up as dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere in the complex, something large was moving. His sensors detected massive vibrations coming from the mining equipment outside. The Vask warrior moved toward the exit. but the main door slammed shut. Emergency lights began flashing red as an automated voice announced, "Warning! Explosive mining charges activated. All personnel evacuate immediately." Kethmore fired his plasma rifle at the door, but the metal was too thick. He was trapped inside a building that was about to explode. This was not how the hunt was supposed to go. Prey did not set traps for hunters. "You see," the human voice continued, "I spent 20 years working with mining equipment. I know how to make things go boom when I want them to." The rumbling grew louder. Through the windows, Kethmore could see the old mining machines coming to life. Conveyor belts were moving, crushers were grinding, and somewhere deep underground, charges were being set to collapse the tunnels. The Vask warrior found an emergency exit and blasted it open with his rifle. He ran outside just as the main building exploded behind him. The force of the blast threw him forward and shrapnel cut through his armor. When he rolled to his feet, his back was bleeding from several wounds. No human had ever hurt him before, not in 20 years of hunting. Kethmore felt something he had not experienced in decades: surprise. This was not going according to plan. A movement caught his eye. On top of a crane 50 meters away, a human figure stood watching him. Even at this distance, Kethmore could see that Dong-Soo Kim was smaller than most humans, with thin arms and graying hair. He looked like he had not slept well in months. "You want me?" Dong-Soo called out across the space between them. "Come and take me. But know that I have nothing left to lose, and that makes me the most dangerous thing in this galaxy." The human jumped from the crane as Kethmore raised his rifle. He landed on a conveyor belt and disappeared into another building. The Vask warrior roared in anger and gave chase, his wounds forgotten in the rush of the hunt. But as he ran through the maze of industrial equipment, Kethmore began to realize something that disturbed him. This human was not running in panic. Every move seemed planned, every escape route prepared in advance. Dong-Soo Kim had turned the entire mining complex into a battlefield where he held every advantage. For the first time in his career as a bounty hunter, Kethmore wondered if he might have underestimated his prey. But that was impossible. Humans were weak. They were prey animals. They could not defeat a Vask warrior, could they? 3 days had passed since Kethmore arrived on Kepler's Rest. 3 days of the strangest hunt of his life. Every time he thought he had cornered his prey, Dong-Soo Kim found a way to escape. Worse, the humans seemed to be enjoying their deadly game. The mining complex had become a maze of traps and dangers. Dong-Soo had spent weeks preparing for this moment, turning every piece of equipment into a weapon. Conveyor belts suddenly started moving when Kethmore stepped on them. Mining lasers fired from hidden positions. Crane arms swung down without warning, trying to crush the Vask warrior. Kethmore had been forced to use his medical supplies twice already. His armor was cracked and dented. His pride was wounded worse than his body. No prey had ever made him work this hard just to stay alive. The human's voice followed him everywhere, coming from speakers throughout the complex. Sometimes Dong-Soo would share technical details about the mining equipment. Other times he talked about his dead family. But always his voice remained calm and controlled. "My daughter, so young, wanted to be an engineer like her father," Dong-Soo said as Kethmore searched through a processing plant. She was only 8 years old, but she already knew how explosives worked. "I taught her about shaped charges and blast patterns. She thought it was fun." Kethmore ignored the words and focused on his sensors. The human was close, somewhere in this building, but every room he entered was empty, filled only with dust and broken machinery. "My wife Hai-Jin was a safety inspector," the voice continued. "She knew when equipment was dangerous. She filed reports about mining station Epsilon 7. She warned them that the reactor shielding was failing. They ignored her because fixing it would cost money." A grinding sound echoed through the building. Kethmore looked up to see a massive ore crusher descending from the ceiling. He rolled aside as it smashed into the floor where he had been standing. The impact shook the entire building. "The reactor explosion killed 300 workers," Dong-Soo said, "including my wife and daughter. The company blamed it on human error. They said my family was careless. They covered up the truth to protect their profits." Kethmore found a stairway leading to the upper levels. As he climbed, he could see through broken windows into other parts of the complex. Movement caught his eye, a human figure running across a catwalk between two buildings. The Vask warrior smashed through a window and leaped across the gap. His forearms grabbed the catwalk's railing as his body slammed into the metal structure. Pain shot through his already injured back. but he pulled himself up and continued the chase. Dongsu was ahead of him, moving through the machinery with practiced ease. The human knew every pipe, every ladder, every shortcut in this place. He had turned his knowledge of industrial equipment into a weapon more dangerous than any gun. I tried to get justice through legal channels, Dongsu called back as he ran. I filed complaints with the colonial government. I contacted news networks. I even tried to sue the company. But they have too much money and too much power. They made the evidence disappear. Kethmore fired his plasma rifle, but Dongsu ducked behind a cooling tower. The blast melted a hole through the metal, filling the air with superheated steam. The Vask warrior pushed through the cloud, his scales protecting him from the heat. They entered another building, this one filled with massive mining drills and excavation equipment. Dongsu ran toward the center of the room where a deep shaft dropped down into darkness. Mining elevators hung on thick cables ready to carry workers into the tunnels below. So I decided to get the evidence myself, Dongsu said, stopping at the edge of the shaft. I broke into their computer systems. I copied their internal reports. I found proof that they knew the reactor would fail and chose to do nothing. Kethmore approached carefully, all 4 weapons ready. The human had nowhere to run now. The shaft was too deep to jump, and the Vask warrior blocked the only exit. Finally, the hunt would end. But as he got closer, Kethmore could see Dongsu's face clearly for the first time. The human looked tired and thin, like he had not been eating well. His clothes were dirty and torn from days of running through the industrial complex. But his eyes burned with a fury that made even the fearsome bounty hunter pause. That evidence is what they call stolen terraforming technology, Dongsu said. It is proof of their crimes, and they will kill anyone to keep it secret. Your family is dead, Kethmore replied, raising his rifle. This will not bring them back. No, Dongsu agreed. But maybe it will save other families from suffering like mine did. The human smiled, and Kethmore felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen that expression before, on the faces of warriors who had accepted death. But this was different. Dongsu was not just ready to die, he was eager for it. You know what I learned during these 3 days? Dongsu asked. I learned that you Vask think strength comes from claws and teeth and thick armor. But you are wrong. Real strength comes from having something worth dying for. The human reached for a control panel mounted on the wall. Kethmore fired his rifle, but Dongsu had already hit the button. Deep below them, explosions began echoing up from the mining tunnels. The entire complex started to shake as underground charges detonated in sequence. I rigged the whole mine to collapse, Dongsu shouted over the noise. Every tunnel, every shaft, every support beam. In about 60 seconds, this entire area will be a crater in the ground. Kethmore looked around desperately. The building was already starting to crack as the ground beneath it became unstable. Chunks of concrete fell from the ceiling and the metal framework groaned under stress. You will die too, Kethmore roared. Yes, Dongsu said calmly, but the evidence is already uploaded to a dozen news networks across the galaxy. My death will not stop the truth from spreading. The Vask warrior realized he had made a terrible mistake. This was not a hunt, it was a trap. From the moment he landed on Kepler's Rest, Dongsu had been the one in control. The human had never been running from death. He had been running toward it, trying to take his hunter with him. As the building collapsed around them, Kethmore understood that he was facing something far more dangerous than any warrior he had ever fought. He was facing a human who had nothing left to lose, and that made Dongsu Kim the most terrifying creature in the galaxy. Kethmore crawled through the darkness of the collapsed tunnel, his body broken and bleeding. The explosion had buried both him and Dongsu under tons of rock and twisted metal. It had taken him 6 hours to dig his way out of the rubble. His armor was cracked, 2 of his arms were badly injured, and several ribs were broken. But he was alive, and somewhere in this underground maze, so was the human. The Vask warrior found shelter in a cave system that connected to the old mining tunnels. His ship's medical scanner showed internal bleeding and possible organ damage. He needed time to heal, but more than that, he needed to understand what had happened to him. For the first time in 20 years, prey had outsmarted him. Dongsu Kim had turned a simple bounty hunt into a nightmare that nearly killed them both. Kethmore could not comprehend how a weak human had managed such a thing. As he bandaged his wounds, Kethmore activated his ship's computer system. The database contained information about every species in known space, including detailed files on human psychology and behavior. He had never bothered to study them before. Prey was prey, and humans were just another target to kill. But now he needed to understand his enemy. The files painted a picture of a species unlike any other in the galaxy. Humans formed strong emotional bonds with their families and friends. They would sacrifice their own lives to protect the people they loved. They mourned their dead for years and sometimes never recovered from loss. Most species saw these traits as weakness. The Vask certainly did, but as Kethmore read deeper, he began to see a different pattern. Human history was filled with examples of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when their loved ones were threatened. Parents lifting impossible weights to save their children. Soldiers charging into certain death to protect their comrades. Scientists working themselves to exhaustion to find cures for diseases that killed their families. The database called it protective aggression and listed it as one of humanity's most dangerous characteristics. When humans had nothing left to lose, they became capable of almost anything. Kethmore thought about Dongsu's words during their chase. The human had not been bragging or trying to intimidate him. He had been stating a simple fact. With his wife and daughter dead, Dongsu truly had nothing left to lose. That made him more dangerous than any warrior. A sound echoed through the caves. Footsteps on stone. Kethmore grabbed his rifle and listened carefully. Someone was moving through the tunnels coming in his direction. His sensors detected a single human life sign about 50 meters away. "I know you are in here," Dongsu's voice called out from the darkness. "Your blood trail was easy to follow." The Vask warrior aimed his rifle at the tunnel entrance. His prey was walking directly into his trap. All he had to do was wait for a clear shot. "I have been thinking about our conversation," Dongsu continued, his voice getting closer. "You said I was trying to bring my family back from the dead. But you are wrong. They are not really gone." Kethmore saw movement at the edge of his vision. A human figure appeared at the tunnel mouth, but it was not where he expected. Dongsu had found another route through the cave system. "My wife Heijin taught me about safety regulations," the human said, sitting down on a rock just outside rifle range. "Every time I set up those explosives, I could hear her voice reminding me to double-check the wiring. She is still with me." The Vask warrior kept his weapon trained on his target, but something made him hesitate. Dongsu looked even worse than before. His clothes were torn and bloody. His face was pale and his hands shook slightly, but his eyes still burned with that terrible fury. "My daughter, so young, showed me how to have fun with dangerous work," Dongsu continued. "She would have loved seeing those mining drills turn into weapons. She would have laughed when that ore crusher almost flattened you." "They are dead," Kethmore said. "You cannot speak to the dead, cannot I?" Dongsu smiled sadly. "Every parent carries their children inside them forever. Every spouse remembers the voice of their lost love. The dead live on in the hearts of those who love them." The human reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data pad. The screen showed a photograph. A woman with kind eyes and a little girl with a bright smile. They were standing in front of a mining station, wearing safety helmets and work clothes. "This was taken 3 days before they died," Dongsu said. So Young had just learned how to calculate blast yields. She was so proud of herself. Heijin was writing her final safety report about the reactor problems. Kethmore stared at the photograph. He had seen thousands of images of his victims' families, but they had never meant anything to him. Now looking at the faces of Dongsu's wife and daughter, he felt something strange. Not sympathy exactly, but a kind of recognition. "Your species understands strength," Dongsu said. "You respect warriors who fight for honor and glory. But you do not understand the strongest force in the universe, love that survives death." The Vask warrior lowered his rifle slightly. "Love is weakness. That makes you emotional. It clouds your judgment, does it?" Dongsu stood up and walked closer. "I have spent 3 days fighting the most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy. I have turned industrial equipment into weapons, set traps that nearly killed us both, and survived explosions that should have ended my life. Does that sound like weakness to you?" Kethmore had no answer. Everything he had been taught about humans said they should be easy prey. But Dongsu had proven that teaching wrong. The human had fought with a skill and determination that rivaled any Vask warrior. "The Terran Colonial Authority hired you to kill me because they are afraid," Dongsu continued. "Not of me personally, but of what I represent. They are afraid that other people will learn the truth about what they did. They are afraid that other families will demand justice." The human activated his datapad and showed Kethmore a series of documents. Internal company reports, safety warnings, cost-cutting directives. All the evidence that proved corporate negligence had caused the mining station explosion. This is what they call stolen terraforming technology, Dongsu said. It is proof that they valued profits more than lives. They let 300 people die to save money, and now they want to silence the only person who can expose their crimes. Kethmore read through the files with growing understanding. The human had not stolen technology. He had uncovered evidence of mass murder. The bounty on his head was not about theft. It was about covering up corporate crimes. "Why are you showing me this?" Kethmore asked. "Because I want you to understand what you are really hunting," Dongsu replied. "You think you are chasing a criminal, but you are hunting a man who lost everything and decided that justice was worth dying for." The Vask warrior felt something crack inside his mind. For 20 years he had believed that strength came from claws and weapons and the ability to kill. But sitting in this dark cave looking at a photograph of a dead woman and child, he began to wonder if he had been wrong about everything. Dawn came to Kepler's rest like blood spreading across the sky. Kethmore and Dongsu stood at opposite ends of the great mining pit, the place where their hunt would finally end. The crater was enormous, carved from the planet's surface by decades of digging. Old equipment surrounded the rim like the bones of dead giants. Both combatants were wounded and exhausted. Kethmore's armor was cracked and stained with his own blood. 2 of his forearms hung useless at his sides. Dongsu looked even worse. His clothes were torn, his face was pale, and he moved like every step caused him pain, but his eyes still burned with that terrible determination. "It ends here," Dongsu called across the pit. "One way or another, it ends here." Kethmore activated his remaining weapons. His plasma rifle hummed with deadly energy, and his energy blade cast blue light across the rocky ground. "You could have run. You could have hidden somewhere in the galaxy where I would never find you." "No," Dongsu replied, checking his own makeshift weapons, mining charges wired to deadman switches. "Running would not bring justice for my family. Running would not stop the company from killing more people." The human had spent the night rigging the entire pit with explosives. Cables ran from his position to charges placed throughout the crater. If he died, if his heart stopped beating, if he released the switches in his hands, everything would explode. The blast would be visible from orbit. "You are willing to die for people you will never meet?" Kethmore asked. "I am willing to die so that no other father has to watch his family burn," Dongsu answered. "That is what love means. It is not just about the people you can touch. It is about the people you can save." They began to move down the sides of the pit, weapons ready. The morning sun cast their shadows long across the rocky walls. This was the moment Kethmore had been waiting for since he first took the bounty. But now, facing his prey across the crater, he felt no excitement for the kill. "I have read your files," the Vask warrior said as they descended. "The evidence you stole. The company reports. You were telling the truth about the mining station. Does that matter to you?" Dongsu asked. Kethmore paused. "It should not matter. He was a bounty hunter, not a judge. His job was to kill, not to decide who deserved to live or die." But something had changed during their days of hunting through the industrial complex. "I have killed many humans," Kethmore admitted. "I always believed you were weak because you felt emotions strongly. I thought your love for family made you vulnerable. And now I think it makes you the most dangerous creature I have ever faced." They reached the bottom of the pit and began circling each other like ancient gladiators. The rocky floor was covered with mining equipment that Dongsu had turned into weapons. Drill bits hung from cables ready to swing down. Acid tanks were positioned to spill their contents. Laser cutters were aimed across the battlefield. "My people value strength above all else," Kethmore said. "We believe the strong should rule and the weak should serve. But you have shown me a different kind of strength." Dongsu smiled grimly. "The strength of a human with nothing left to lose." "Yes, and I do not know if I can defeat it." They stopped moving, facing each other across 30 meters of open ground. In that moment, both warriors understood that only one of them would leave this place alive. The question was whether either of them would survive. "I could let you go," Kethmore said quietly. "I could return to my ship and tell my employers that you died in the explosion." "Why would you do that?" The Vask warrior looked down at his weapons, then back at the human who had taught him so much about courage. "Because for the first time in my life I am not sure the prey deserves to be hunted." Dongsu raised his detonator switches. "I cannot let you leave this planet alive. You know too much about my evidence. You could tell the company where to find it. Then we are both trapped, Kethmore realized. No, Dongsu said. You have a choice. Help me upload this evidence to the news networks across the galaxy, and I will make sure you can escape safely. And if I refuse, then we both die here, and the evidence gets uploaded automatically when my heart stops beating. Kethmore felt something he had never experienced before, respect for his prey. This human had outmaneuvered him completely. Every move, every trap, every explosion had been leading to this moment. Dongsu had never been running from death. He had been running toward justice. You would trust me to help you? Kethmore asked. No, Dongsu replied honestly. But I would trust you to do what benefits you most. And right now, helping me is the only way you survive. The Vask warrior made his choice. He powered down his weapons and walked toward the human. With his good arms, he helped Dongsu connect his datapad to a powerful communications array that could reach the Outer Rim networks. As the evidence began uploading, Dongsu asked, "Why are you helping me?" Kethmore thought about everything he had learned during their hunt. About love that survived death. About strength that came from caring for others. About the difference between cruelty and true power. Because you fight not like a warrior, but like something more dangerous. A human with nothing to lose. I have hunted across 1,000 worlds and killed beings of every species, but I have never faced anything as terrifying as you. The upload finished just as ships appeared in the sky above them. The Terran Colonial Authority had found them at last. But it was too late. The evidence was already spreading across the galaxy, reaching news networks and government officials on dozens of worlds. Kethmore grabbed Dongsu and activated his personal teleporter. They materialized on the deck of his ship, just as the corporate security forces began bombing the mining pit. The Bloodfang lifted off and disappeared into hyperspace before the enemy ships could react. Hours later, safe in the Outer Rim, they watched news reports of corporate executives being arrested across human space. The evidence had sparked investigations on every world where the company operated. Families of the mining station victims would finally receive justice. What will you do now? Kethmore asked. Dongsu looked at the photograph of his wife and daughter, then out at the stars. I think I will go home. Back to the place where Heijin and So Young are buried. I want to tell them that the people who killed them will finally pay for their crimes. The Vask warrior nodded. He understood now that some things were more important than money or glory. Some fights were worth having, even when you had everything to lose. As he watched Dongsu leave his ship at a space station in neutral territory, Kethmore realized that he would never be the same. The most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy had learned that the most dangerous thing in the universe was not claws or weapons or armor. It was simply a human with nothing left to lose.